Monitor and Adjust dimension of the T-TEST rubric. This module focuses on how teachers use formal and informal measures to collect, analyze, and apply student progress data in order to make necessary adjustments to both lessons and also to make informed instructional decisions. Monitor and adjust is one of 4 dimensions in the instruction domain of the T-TEST rubric, dimension 2.5. The overall definition reminds us that the teacher formally and informally collects, analyzes, and uses student progress data and makes needed lesson adjustments. What is implied in this definition is that teachers have processes for formally and informally collecting, analyzing, and using student progress data. As a result of this data, therefore, teachers make necessary lesson adjustments. In order to make these changes and ensure student learning, teachers must know not only their content and its related pedagogy, but also the students in their class in order to determine the best instructional methods to meet their instructional needs. Using Monitor and Adjust as a lens, let's think about 2 focus questions. First, how do teachers gather feedback from students to monitor and assess how these students are responding to instruction, activities, pacing, and the like? Second, how is the feedback used to adjust the lesson and maintain the focus on positive learning outcomes? In order to make some explicit connections, let's look at the links to the Texas Teacher Standards. There are 3 standards that directly tie to this dimension of Monitor and Adjust. Standard 1, Instructional Planning and Delivery. 1.6, Teachers consistently check for understanding, give immediate feedback, and make lesson adjustments as necessary. Standard 2, Knowledge of students and student learning. Teachers acquire, analyze, and use background information to engage students in learning. And Standard 5, Data-driven practices. 2 indicators, 5.3, teachers regularly collect, review, and analyze data to monitor student progress. And 5.4, teachers utilize the data they collect and analyze to inform their instructional strategies and adjust short and long-term plans accordingly. We're now thinking about data-driven decision-making as it applies to classroom instruction and specifically the Monitor and Adjust dimension. When we think about how we monitor and adjust instruction, we do this based on ongoing formal and informal assessment measures, also based on input and feedback from students, based on student progress data and work samples, based on student behavior and responses for engagement and understanding, based on questioning and checks for understanding, and finally, based on differences in student needs and learning. Honing in on the Monitor and Adjust dimension, there are key elements in the T-TEST rubric that are present for this specific dimension. First, data and student feedback. In other words, how are we using data and student feedback to make decisions about when and how to monitor and adjust? Also, how do we monitor and adjust instruction, activities, and pacing to make sure that the lesson is meeting the instructional needs of the students served in that classroom? How are we using questioning and academic feedback in order to understand how students are learning, any misunderstandings, perhaps any misconceptions, and then last, how do we ensure that student engagement is present? To take this further and clarify, the teacher plans for a high-quality, high-engaging lesson and should be prepared to implement adjustments to instruction when evidence reveals ineffective instruction, confusion, or misunderstandings. The teacher, therefore, must continuously assess what is working and what is not working and know when students are acquiring the established knowledge and skills. Thinking about instructional monitoring and adjustments and how those occur during instruction, let's now look at some examples that illustrate how teachers might monitor and adjust classroom activities. We may see that they increase or decrease direct instruction or other lesson elements. They change the type of thinking or problem solving that's happening during instruction. They modify the amount and types of questions, cues, and prompts. They change the amount and type of academic feedback. They increase or decrease instructional groupings. They adjust the pacing to the rate of learning. They change the mode of presentation and perhaps the instructional materials. They modify written or oral directions, adjust behavioral strategies, use ongoing checks for understanding, perhaps through questioning, modify student response strategies, and last but not least, review prior learning. Let's look at one related piece of research for Monitor and Adjust. Take a minute to read through this section. We see a direct connection here with content knowledge and expertise and that specific dimension. Now read through this second piece of research. When we look at the second piece of research, we can see that data and assessments is directly tied to this dimension of Monitor and Adjust. Let's look at another piece of related research from Madeline Hunter, a researcher that we're very familiar with. Take a minute to read through this. As we've read, it is critical, therefore, to specifically monitor learning when skills and concepts are initially introduced in order to address misunderstandings and misconceptions. Taking our learning out to the T-test rubric, let's look at the continuum of descriptors and clarify these for the proficient, accomplished, and distinguished levels collectively. The first set of descriptors tell us that when teachers are methodical about the types of activities they use to gather input from students and track their progress, they are better able to identify students who need additional assistance or some alternative form of instruction. Data should be used to monitor student progress, adjust instructional plans, strategically target activities that build on one another, and pay close attention to how pacing needs to be adjusted to students' learning patterns. The second set of descriptors, effective teachers plan instructional activities which embrace students' likes and interests in order to keep them motivated and engaged. For content and instruction to be personally meaningful to students, there must be a clear communicated purpose for learning with connections to students' interests and ideas where students can easily relate. Students need to understand why the content or skill being taught in a lesson is important for them to master and how their mastery will impact them personally and in real life. The last set of descriptors include both questioning and academic feedback strategies as powerful tools to check for understanding. When using questioning, the teacher utilizes questions that are powerful and coherent. Then students' responses, including follow-up questions and responses, may be utilized as a formative assessment in determining which students have mastered the learning objective. This descriptor also focuses on how teachers respond to students' comments and questions and addresses the quality of feedback in supporting student learning as opposed to feedback that only informs students of the accurateness of their responses. The feedback is used as a monitoring strategy for the teacher in order to make adjustments in instruction which impact student performance. This dimension, monitor and adjust, is a critical consideration for teachers during the actual lesson. Effective teachers are constantly monitoring and assessing how students are responding to instruction and collecting feedback from students. They use this data to make necessary adjustments to the execution of the lesson in order to help students focus, engage, and learn. Likewise, during planning, the teacher reviews formal and informal data to monitor learning and make adjustments during planning as well. Appraisers are looking at how teachers use data they are gathering from students to monitor and adjust the planning process. The bottom line is that the learner outcomes are used to determine the anchor for learning. It is important for us as learners to see the practical application of t-tests in practice. What might we see related to monitor and adjust? Teachers analyze and review data in a timely, thorough, accurate, and appropriate manner, both individually and with colleagues, to monitor student learning. Teachers combine results from different measures, including student-specific feedback, to develop a holistic picture of student strengths and learning needs. Teachers use the data they collect and analyze to inform their instructional strategies and to inform short and long-term plans accordingly. Teachers vary methods of assessing learning to accommodate students' learning needs, linguistic differences, and/or varying levels of background knowledge. What are some additional practical applications for monitor and adjust? Teachers apply evidence-based strategies to address individual student learning needs and differences, adjust their instruction, and support the learning needs of each student. Teachers gauge student progress and ensure student mastery of content knowledge and skills by providing assessments aligned to the instructional objectives and outcomes as accurate measures of student learning. Teachers also regularly compare their curriculum scope and sequence with student data to ensure they are on track and make adjustments as necessary. Teachers understand how the readiness and supporting standards of the TEKS are used to support students' mastery of the standards and learning objectives. And last, teachers effectively use questioning and feedback strategies to check for understanding. There is a direct correlation between how the lesson is planned and executed during instruction as a cyclical process. The lesson results are used to inform subsequent planning as a refined process. Teachers and appraisers are looking for how students are making progress towards the learning targets and how planning and instruction are used to close performance gaps. The question then becomes, how are teachers monitoring and adjusting instruction both in the planning and execution phases of the lesson? We know that t-test is an evidence-based process, and appraisers therefore consistently collect evidence to use in conjunction with a rubric to validate how practices are occurring. What are some questions therefore that appraisers might use to guide their thinking around this dimension of monitor and adjust? First, how are formal and informal data measures collected, analyzed, and applied to assess how students are progressing with the curriculum expectations? How is data systematically tracked to show trends and patterns over time? How are lessons monitored and adjusted, including activities and pacing, to align with student progress data and students' learning needs? How are questioning and feedback used to check for understanding? How are instruction, activities, and materials utilized in ways that are meaningful, relevant, motivating, and engaging for students? These are just some questions related to the t-test rubric to help appraisers think about this dimension of monitor and adjust and what should be happening during classroom instruction. When we think about this dimension of monitor and adjust, it's very evident that teachers should be clear about what students are expected to know and be able to do, those learner outcomes in the t-test triangle, and also to understand what students should be saying and doing to demonstrate that. Let's then pull this together and think about what effective teachers do. First, effective teachers adjust instruction and activities to maintain student engagement. They also use input and feedback from students to monitor and adjust instruction, activities, and pacing in order to respond to students' varying needs. They also check for understanding through purposeful questioning to determine what students know, need to know, understand, and where there are misunderstandings. They also provide specific feedback to students that is academically focused, frequent, high quality, and supports students' learning rather than feedback that simply informs students of the accuracy of their responses. And last, effective teachers use ongoing formal and informal measures to monitor and assess students and then make necessary adjustments to instruction based on that data. So we're going to ask you to think now about this dimension of monitor and adjust, and given what was presented in this module, what are your next steps to grow and develop in this area? We also want to thank you for joining us with this module, and we look forward to seeing you in the next module.